Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something that's honestly a bit of a game changer. We're exploring a profound philosophical text that completely challenges our modern obsession with success, constant comparison, and just, well, accumulating stuff. It's based on a book called The Origin of Happiness, and it fundamentally flips how we look at our own lives, our everyday struggles, and how we connect with the people around us.
Okay, let's dive into this with a pretty undeniable universal truth. Every single human being is born naked. We all start out exactly at zero. We don't come into this world with a bank account, a prestigious job title, or designer clothes. Regardless of your environment, your family history, or your background, our baseline is a blank slate. We start with absolutely nothing. When you really pause and think about that, it's a deeply leveling concept. Nobody gets a head start on existence itself.
Which leads us to a really stark question, doesn't it? One that sits right at the core of the human experience. If everyone is born with absolutely nothing, why is unhappiness so intensely common? Why do we walk around with this heavy, persistent feeling of unfulfillment when, technically speaking, anything we have right now is a step up from where we started? This question is our narrative hook for today, because the answer forces us to completely re-examine how we measure the value of our own lives.
Section 1. The start from zero, or remembering where we began. You know, as we grow, from infants to kids to adults, we naturally start to accumulate things. We gain skills, friends, possessions, social status, and what happens is we get so incredibly used to this constant accumulation that we totally forget those humble beginnings. It's like we establish a new, higher baseline for ourselves every single year. The source text uses this beautiful metaphor of a golden egg bathed in sunlight to represent the raw, bright potential of a polished mind. Because think about it, since we start at absolute zero, any progress we make in life, any tiny step forward, is technically a massive gain. If we just kept this zero start in mind, we naturally feel immense gratitude every single day. We've gained so much since day one. But as we all know, human nature kind of gets in the way of that.
Section 2. The Trap of Comparison. The Root of Modern Unhappiness.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact moment our perspective shifts. Instead of looking backward at our own amazing growth from zero, we start looking sideways at what everyone else possesses. It's a complete shift in our discovery of values. On one hand, the zero-start mindset focuses on our own gains, which fosters genuine gratitude and personal growth. But on the other hand, the comparison mindset, that focuses purely on what we lack compared to the person next door, breeding endless dissatisfaction. The source text knows how incredibly early this starts too, like kids on a playground comparing who has a doctor for a parent or who's wearing a nicer sweater. Then we grow up, and suddenly we're comparing our treatment inside elite companies, agonizing over why a colleague got a slightly better promotion or a bigger office. In both cases, we've totally forgotten our zero start. We trade our joy for this heavy, exhausting burden of jealousy.
Section 3. Polishing the Mind. The Great Realization.
So how on earth do we break free from this trap? Well, to find the solution, the author introduces a pivotal, life-altering realization that sits right at the boundary between life and death. The text uses a fascinating historical metaphor here called Columbus's egg. A Columbus's egg is basically a profoundly simple truth or discovery that seems completely obvious, but only after someone wise points it out to you. The author argues that wise people, or saints throughout history, have realized a fundamental truth about human existence that the rest of us entirely miss while we're busy comparing ourselves to our neighbors. And that simple, profound truth is this: just as we entered this world with zero material possessions, we leave this world in exactly the same way.
Let's just let this quote sink in for a moment. We cannot take status, honor, wealth, or material goods to the next world. We can only take our mind. Wow. If the mind, or the heart, as it's often called when we talk about the training of the heart, is literally the only thing we retain when our life ends, then obsessing over material comparison is fundamentally pointless. Therefore, our true life purpose, according to the text, is what they call polishing the mind through spiritual training. It's about creating enduring value within ourselves rather than hoarding temporary value around ourselves.
Section 4. The Two Types of Love. Taking versus giving.
So how exactly do we go about polishing our minds and training our hearts? Well, the text suggests it directly connects to how we treat other people. The source material starkly splits human love into two total opposite categories. First, we have taking love. This is highly conditional. It breeds attachment and a desire to control. The author compares it to trapping a beautiful bird in a cage using sticky glue, just to keep it all for yourself. And surprisingly, the text metaphorically says that taking love gives birth to two terrible children, a daughter named jealousy and a son named self-satisfaction. Then on the flip side, we have giving love. This is unconditional, free, and completely selfless. It doesn't bind people, it empowers them and lets them fly. It radiates endlessly without resting, exactly like the sun giving out heat and light to the solar system without ever asking for a single thing in return.
Now, what's really interesting about this concept is the fascinating challenge it presents. Imagine your own personal love balance sheet. If you were to sit down right now and honestly list every single instance where you received or took love, favors, and support, versus the times you truly gave love unconditionally, without expecting a thank you, a favor in return, or any recognition at all, what would your balance sheet look like? The author points out that most people are absolutely shocked to realize how heavily they lean toward taking. Often, the purely giving side is heartbreakingly small. We're just conditioned by society to measure what we get rather than what we give.
Section 5. The Origin of Happiness. Lighting the Darkness.
And this is where it all comes together. If we want to escape the trap of comparison, truly remember our zero start, and actually polish our minds, we have to actively shift that balance sheet. The text lays out a beautiful, simple path to do this. Step 1. Empty your mind of ego and complaints, remembering that everything you have is a gift from that initial start at zero. Step 2. Begin with giving love to society and to others without expecting any reward. And step 3. Light another person's candle with your flame. I absolutely love this metaphor from the text. Think about it. A candle loses absolutely none of its own fire by lighting another candle. Your light doesn't diminish when you share it. Practicing giving love fills your own heart with light and spreads that light to those around you, actively banishing the darkness from the world.
As we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a lingering thought, one that really demands a bit of action. You started with absolutely nothing, yet right now, you possess a mind capable of generating infinite light for the people around you. So, whose candle will you light today? Keep that in mind as you go about your week. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey, and I genuinely hope this fresh perspective helps you discover your own origin of happiness.
Hello and welcome to another explainer. Today, we're unpacking a profound shift in how we fundamentally view our existence. We're looking at Chapter 2 of Ryuho Okawa's The Origin of Happiness, specifically focusing on giving love and starting from absolute zero. Okay, let's dive into this. It sounds like a pretty simple question, right? But it's actually incredibly difficult to pull off. What happens when we strip away all our assumptions and just start from absolute zero? We spend our whole lives obsessively accumulating stuff, wealth, status, even grudges. But what if we hit the reset button on all those worldly expectations? What if we approach our existence based not on what we have, but on the radical idea that we actually possess nothing at all? To answer that, we're grounding our explainer today right here in Chapter 2 on Giving Love, from the lectures on The Origin of Happiness. Now, this text completely dismantles our everyday view of life. It starts with this incredible concept of starting from zero. It's the realization that we enter this world with completely empty hands, born into an environment we actually chose as a training ground for our souls. Just think about how that instantly reframes your perspective. If you realize you arrived here with absolutely nothing, it just kind of strips away all that heavy materialistic entitlement, doesn't it? It removes the anxiety of losing worldly possessions because, well, you didn't bring them with you in the first place. Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast between two totally different ways of existing. On one side, we have our earthly baggage. This is how society usually measures a life, right? Accumulated wealth, job titles, fancy degrees. But the text argues none of that matters in the grand scheme. On the other side, we have the naked soul. If you stand there with empty hands, what's actually left? It requires a deep re-examining of oneself to realize that when you strip away the famous labels in the bank accounts, the only true measure of success is the growth and enlightenment of your soul. So, how exactly does that soul grow? Well, the text introduces one of the most powerful metaphors you'll find in the book. It describes hardships, sadness, and suffering not as curses, but as whetstones. Yeah, whetstones. Just like a rough stone is used to forcefully sharpen and polish a blade, the trials we face are placed in our lives to sharpen our souls. It's all about finding the joy of discovery, even when we're in our absolute darkest moments. Let's break down how we should reframe hardship based on this. First, and absolutely foremost, suffering is not a punishment. If we view life purely in two dimensions, it's easy to ask, why is there all this unhappiness? But the source challenges us to completely abandon that victim mindset. Instead, every struggle, every moment of sorrow is a necessary tool. These experiences polish the soul. They help us find light in the darkness, and they lead directly to the discovery of entirely new values and an inner strength we literally wouldn't have found otherwise. This becomes incredibly important when we transition to the concept of the afterlife presented in the text. The rule is brutally simple. The mind is everything in this world and the next. When we leave this physical realm, bodies disappear. The text bluntly points out that you don't take your physical brain or your money with you. You can't just wrap up your earthly possessions and carry them back. The only thing that survives, the absolutely only thing you take with you, is the daily state of your mind. And this brings us to this brilliant muddy water metaphor to explain how souls are sorted in the afterlife. It's based entirely on their mental state. Imagine a glass of muddy water settling. If your mind is filled with pure, giving thoughts, you rise to the top, just like clear upper water. If you have mixed intentions, you kind of hover in the middle like suspended particles. But, and here's the kicker, if your mind is heavy with selfish, taking thoughts, you sink to the very bottom, just like thick sediment trapped in the glass. It's a perfect, natural sorting mechanism based entirely on your inner truth and your pursuit of a righteous heart. So this brings us to a really vital, practical question, a true watershed of life. If only the mind survives, and if our daily thoughts determine our ultimate reality, how are we supposed to interact with others right now, today? How do we make sure we don't become that heavy sediment stuck at the bottom of the glass? Well, the answer lies in how we approach love. The text starkly juxtaposes two concepts, taking love versus giving love. Taking love is heavy. It's transactional. It's the kind of love that constantly demands something in return. That's what creates the sediment we just talked about. Giving love, on the other hand, is expansive. It expects absolutely no reward, it sets people free, and it is fundamentally tied to our spiritual growth as we move towards true, unconditional love. The source material gives us this incredibly evocative metaphor. It says, taking love is like a bird in a cage. Giving love is like the ceaseless, unconditional energy of the sun. Really think about that for a second. When you love someone just to possess them, you are literally locking them in a cage. But true, giving love, it's like the sun. It radiates light and heat unconditionally every single day without ever asking the earth for a favor in return. Let's look a bit closer at the trap of taking love. When we treat relationships as a simple give and take, we're basically running a cold business transaction. If you expect a reward or a return for your affection, your love dies. This kind of love binds and restricts your partner. The text even personifies this beautifully, stating that taking love actually gives birth to two very difficult children, a daughter named jealousy and a son named self-satisfaction. It is a heavy earthly baggage that just holds your soul back. So, how do we shift to giving love? The source introduces this gorgeous imagery. Discover the golden pipe within you, connecting to infinite wisdom. When we practice unconditional love, we don't need to seek validation from the outside world. Instead, we tap into our inner divinity. We find this golden pipe inside ourselves, which connects directly to the universe's infinite wisdom and energy. It flows right through us, allowing us to give ceaselessly. So the crucial point here is how we take this out of the realm of abstract philosophy and turn it into a daily habit. Here are the actionable takeaways for cultivating the right mind every single day. Step 1. Abandon the expectation of reward. Literally stop treating love as a transaction. Step 2. Look for the light, the inherent goodness in everyone you meet. Step 3. Use your love to set people free, allowing them to grow rather than trying to own them. And finally, step 4. Make the exploration of your inner divinity a true daily practice. That is the golden path to victory in life. Which leaves us with this final thought. We started by realizing we come into this world with totally empty hands, as naked souls in a training ground, and we leave this world with only the state of our minds. This is the true origin of happiness, knowing that your ultimate spiritual reality depends entirely on the unconditional light you share. So, if your hands are empty right now, what will you choose to give today? Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this first perspective brings a little more light to your journey.
Let's jump right in. Today, we are unpacking Chapter 3 of Ryuho Okawa's The Origin of Happiness in this explainer. We're going to map out the exact philosophical journey laid down in the text. It's a fascinating progression, really, one that starts quietly right inside the individual mind and scales all the way up to a literal vision for transforming the entire world. So looking at the source text, it's centered on this incredibly bright, expansive concept of happiness, one that takes root in love. This specific chapter outlines a profound ascending path. It actually asks you, the reader, to move step by step from deep personal reflection straight into taking an active role in global transformation. It's not just some theoretical essay. It's really designed as a practical roadmap.
To make sense of all this, we'll follow the author's exact chronological buildup across 5 steps. Reflections on the journey, a journey of light, transcending self and other, the 7 declarations of happiness, and finally, constructing a utopia.
Starting with Part 1, Reflections on the Journey. This is where we look inward first.
We kick things off exactly where the text does. The chapter opens with a reflection set right at the start of the new year. Okawa asks us to just pause and deeply consider our current coordinates in time and space. Specifically, he brings up the profound meaning of being born in late 20th century Japan, framing this current life as part of an infinite cycle of reincarnation. It's all about grounding yourself in the exact specific moment you exist in right now.
But here's the catch. The text frames this self-reflection not as an exercise in ego, but as a profound realization of gratitude. By examining our place in the world, the argument goes, we start to recognize this immense divine love that literally sustains our existence. It's about realizing we are already receiving what the book calls great love, simply by being here. Moving right along to Section 2, A Journey of Light. This is where the philosophy really expands. Once we recognize we're receiving this love, we're called to step up and actively participate in it. According to the source, discovering this great love acts as a brand new principle for human action. It fundamentally shifts us past our basic, everyday personal desires. So it's no longer just about survival or getting comfortable. It's about seeing the divine workings in our everyday environment and actively searching out the love hidden within the hearts of the people right in front of us.
This brings up a brilliant contrast in the text. On one side, you have what's called small self-realization. This is basically just wanting things for yourself, getting swayed by selfish desires, and focusing strictly on your own personal expectations. But on the flip side, you have great self-realization. This is where your actions align with a higher divine purpose. You are, effectively, serving as the hands and feet of God to bring light into the world. A pretty massive shift in perspective, right?
Which leads perfectly into Section 3, Transcending Self and Other.
As we step from individual purpose to our relationship with everyone else, there's this striking quote from the text. Diverse personalities do not reject each other, but merge to create a great art of light. It beautifully captures the idea that our varying traits and opinions aren't meant for conflict. Instead, all these diverse personalities are meant for a harmonious convergence, literally coming together to create a massive collective art of light.
The crucial takeaway here is that true progress requires completely breaking down the barriers between me and you. The author urges us to transcend these walls, and he uses this incredibly powerful metaphor of becoming a torrent of love. It's like a force so strong, so fluid, that it simply washes right over the obstacles between ourselves and others, allowing us to move forward and forward again, together.
Next up, Section 4, The 7 Declarations of Happiness.
This really is the climax of the chapter's progression. We've shifted our mindset, we've redefined our relationship with others, and now the text gives us a concrete blueprint for action. The author presents these 7 declarations for happiness not just as nice philosophical ideas, but literally as a marching banner for humanity. It's a rallying cry to advance. Let's break down exactly what these declarations are.
The first 4 declarations are super focused on personal and community practice. They call for the exploration of divine truth and the active learning of that truth. Then it moves into the missionary work to actually spread it, and finally, the daily, practical realization of love. It's an incredibly active, energetic commitment to walking the walk.
Then, the final 3 declarations push our focus dramatically outward. We're talking massive societal goals here. It calls for the creation of happiness, not just for us today, but for future generations. It demands the overall development of humanity. And this all builds up to the ultimate, grandest objective of the entire framework, the construction of a utopia.
And that brings us to our 5th and final section, Constructing a Utopia.
So what does this final destination actually look like? Well, the source text makes a really fascinating argument. It states that this task of building a utopia isn't just reserved for the physical Earth. The vision is literally cosmic in scale. It involves transforming and elevating the spiritual realms as well, specifically mentioning the 4th dimensional realms, so that absolutely all of creation is brought into this utopian state.
But how on earth do we actually achieve a goal that lofty? The text insists it all comes right back to how we view each other. We have to look at everyone and everything with an equal mind of love. The absolute key here, according to the author, is finding and praising the shining divinity, that hidden divine spark inside every single person. And not just people, but every living thing, right down to the insects and the flowers.
The chapter leaves us with a huge, very direct challenge. It's not enough to just listen to these ideas or nod along. Having seen this entire roadmap from quiet inner reflection all the way to a global utopia, what concrete actions are you actually going to take? How will you dedicate your own limited time and energy to advancing the happiness of humanity? It's a provocative question, for sure, and one that demands a real, active answer from all of us on this journey.
Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. If you've ever, just sat there and wondered why we go through such painful hurdles in life and how those exact obstacles might actually be the secret key to a huge spiritual awakening, well, you're absolutely going to love this. Today, we're unpacking some really profound concepts from Chapter 4 of The Origin of Happiness.
The source material we're diving into today explores a truly powerful premise. It looks at how our absolute deepest, most painful human struggles can actually act as the catalyst for total spiritual transformation. It literally flips the script on how we normally think about failure.
We're going to follow a pretty clear arc today. We'll trace the journey from dealing with earthly hardships to keeping our hearts pure, tackling self-exhibitionism, healing from inferiority, and finally, getting to the true origin of faith.
All right, let's get right into our first section, Encounters Through Hardship, and why our absolute lowest points actually matter.
So the text starts by asking this incredibly fundamental question, one we've all probably asked ourselves at some point. If the divine exists, if there's a higher ideal, why is there just so much suffering, illness, and failure in the world? Why all the heartbreak?
Well, the author points out that these incredibly relatable worldly failures aren't just random punishments. Think about it. Bombing a crucial exam, facing a terrifying illness, getting rejected for that job you desperately wanted, or going through a brutal breakup. The text actually suggests these exact painful experiences are built-in mechanisms designed to turn us deeply toward the divine. Basically, they force us to look up when absolutely everything around us feels like it's completely falling apart.
Think of it this way. A completely smooth life, getting straight A's, landing the perfect job, having a flawless marriage might actually mean you never end up encountering the divine. Why? Because you never actually need to search for any deeper meaning. But, as we know, over 99% of people experience deep failure and sleepless nights. And the wild thing is, within those exact stormy setbacks, that's where the hidden seeds of true spiritual joy are actually planted.
Moving right along to Section 2, Keeping the Heart Pure, and how we go about removing the mind's cloudiness.
Now, the text explicitly brings in this very famous quote from Jesus, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And it uses this to emphasize that having a pure mind is literally the absolute prerequisite for any real, profound encounter with the divine. I mean, it makes sense, right? You simply can't connect with a higher truth if your internal lens is all clouded up.
So how do we actually get that purity? Well, it is definitely not a passive process. The source defines the method as rigorous self-reflection. It requires us to actively pinpoint and then correct those thoughts that just don't align with a higher will. It's really about consciously sweeping away the daily cloudiness of our frustrations, our arrogance, and all those petty grievances we hold on to. That brings us to Section 3, Overcoming Self-Exhibitionism, or basically, the ultimate battle with the human ego. The text gives a pretty stark warning here. It says that constantly wanting to be recognized as wonderful, always waiting around for the applause of others, often stems from a really toxic comparative desire. It's that ego-driven trap of feeling like you are only high up if someone else is pushed down. True faith, on the other hand, operates in a completely different universe. It doesn't look for applause at all. It just genuinely hopes for the success and happiness of other people. And there's this absolutely beautiful metaphor the author uses to explain this. True faith means silently planting seeds and bulbs for future generations. It's the quiet, everyday dedication of putting good out into the world, without feeling this desperate need to pluck the flowers right now just so you can decorate yourself. It's literally a total surrender of needing that immediate, ego-boosting recognition.
Let's transition into Section 4, Healing Inferiority with Love, which serves as the perfect antidote to inner turmoil.
You see, underneath that desire to show off, there's usually a deeper wound. When dealing with an inferiority complex, the text outlines two really common traps we fall into. Trap number one is just being completely crushed by it, letting it become the root cause of lifelong unhappiness. Trap number two is using it as this desperate, tightly coiled spring to overachieve just to prove everyone wrong. But here is the critical observation the source makes. Both of these types of people are completely lacking genuine inner peace. They're still entirely driven by a wound.
So what's the fix? Well, the solution provided by the source is incredibly profound. To overcome this complex, we have to start by actually believing in ourselves as children of God, recognizing that we have an innate, divine worth. Once you have that solid foundation, love literally becomes the universal medicine. By giving unconditional, unexpected love to others, without demanding a single thing in return, we actually end up healing the deep-seated wounds of our own inferiority. It's a total game changer.
And finally, Section 5, the true origin of faith, where we reach the summit of this journey.
Okay, so here is the ultimate culminating truth of the text. Faith absolutely does not start with thinking you are perfect. In fact, if you are 100% completely satisfied with yourself, the seed of faith might actually never sprout for you. The true origin of faith starts with a really humble, deeply honest awareness of your own flaws and your own incompleteness. It's a continuous upward striving toward a divine ideal, recognizing, hey, we are always going to be a work in progress, and that is exactly the point.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, pretty provocative question taken straight from the source's wisdom. Take a look at your own life right now, your struggles and your ambitions. When you face a hardship or when you're chasing success, ask yourself, are you just plucking flowers to decorate yourself in the present moment, or are you silently, humbly planting seeds for others to enjoy long into the future? Something to really chew on. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey through the origin of faith.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a look at a really profound philosophical framework. It's one that maps out the journey from life's harshest, absolute coldest winters all the way to a vibrant, colorful season of development. So if you're ready to explore how shifting your perspective can literally alter your reality, let's just jump right in. You know, take a second right now and just reflect on your own periods of hardship. We've all been there, right? It feels incredibly isolating, it feels bitter, and honestly, it usually feels like it's just never going to end. But what if that feeling of being permanently stuck is actually just a complete misunderstanding of how the seasons of personal growth actually work? To answer that, we're drawing directly from Chapter 5 of Ryuho Okawa's The Origin of Happiness. We're going to break down a section beautifully titled Spring in Full Bloom, and the author lays this out through 5 key themes: the breath of spring, a time for patience, the torrent of life, towards development, and finally, proof of limitless wisdom. We're going to map this all out so you can easily grab hold of the core mechanics here. All right, part 1, the season of endurance and the arrival of spring. Okay, let's dive into this. The central idea here is that life inevitably has this necessary season of endurance. The text argues that the harsh winter is literally just preparation for what it calls the breath of spring. So human suffering isn't permanent. It's more like a dormant phase, meant to point us towards development, making that coming growth so much more impactful. Think of it kind of like a coiled spring. The freezing cold and the pressure, they aren't there to break you. They're actually there to force you to gather your energy so you can eventually launch forward. So why do we let ourselves suffer so intensely? Well, the source material points directly to something it calls the Trinity of Doubt as the root cause of our prolonged misery. And those are a lack of trust in yourself, a lack of trust in others, and a lack of trust in the divine, or God. When these 3 vital elements are missing, we basically become completely consumed by our everyday problems. We spend all of our energy just complaining about how cold it is outside, completely missing the deeper purpose of the season. And this brilliantly illustrates the huge disconnect between how we usually handle hardship versus what the text is actually advising us to do. Most people get completely trapped in their external environment, seeking validation, blaming other people, just desperately hoping someone will rescue them. But the text pushes for a radical shift to your internal environment. It's about storing true power and actively looking inside yourself. Because let's be real, you don't get warm by yelling at the winter sky, you get warm by quietly building a fire inside. Which brings us to what the text refers to as a time for patience. And I really want to slow down for a second and just reflect on this quote. Like a tree stretching its buds under the winter snow, you must store power within. Just let that visual sink in for a moment. even when everything looks totally dead and frozen and just hopeless on the surface, there's this incredible, quiet work happening underneath the snow. The buds are forming. The tree is gathering its strength. It's absolutely crucial to build that internal resilience during your hardest times, silently preparing for the thaw. And guys, when that thaw finally does come, it brings the breath of spring. The text says, the breath of spring is an encouragement to that which seeks to develop. This isn't just some passive change in the weather. The author describes the arrival of spring as a dynamic torrent of life. It's an active, high-energy reward for all your patience. It's like the universe is literally cheering on those who endured the winter and are finally ready to stretch out and bloom. It is just such a fantastic, energizing way to reframe the end of a really tough period. Moving right along to our next section, breaking the status quo. Now, enduring the winter is really only half the equation. Eventually, you gotta have the courage to break out of that stagnant state. And the author uses this striking, really unique metaphor for how we do this, the golden pipe, or ogon no paipu. According to the text, this inner connection is the proof of limitless wisdom that every single individual possesses. It's literally a conduit leading straight to boundless wisdom and divine energy. The whole philosophy here is that you are not just some isolated, helpless person. You are fundamentally plugged into an infinite source. You just have to know where to look. Okay, so the million-dollar question, how do we actually activate this connection? Well, the roadmap is pretty clear. First, you have to stop seeking answers from other people, and you have to stop waiting for your environment to magically change to make you happy. Doing that just keeps you trapped in the external world. Instead, you need to look deep into your own mind. That is where the actual connection is. By turning inward and trusting yourself, you open up the valve and you let that infinite wisdom flow. You tap into an endless reservoir of strength. And the promised result of this? It's profound. The text says it's a single connection eliminating all fear and sorrow. According to the source material, once you discover and actually use this inner golden pipe, those feelings of isolation and fear, they just melt away. Why? Because you finally realize you are connected to a limitless source of energy. You aren't just floating around aimlessly, you are anchored deeply to infinite wisdom. So I want to leave you with this ultimate, slightly provocative question. Are you ready to stop complaining about the cold and discover the boundless wisdom stored inside you? Think about how this shift, moving from external complaining to internal power, can apply to your own life right now. Because according to this philosophy, the power to bloom is entirely in your hands. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep examining the world closely, keep building that internal fire, and I will catch you in our next explainer.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into Chapter 6 of our source material, The Origin of Courage. And listen, we're going to completely reframe how you think about courage today. We usually think of it as, just a fleeting feeling, a sudden burst of bravery when you're scared. But the framework we're unpacking right now, it points to something way deeper and honestly, a lot more demanding.
We're drawing these insights from the text, The Origin of Happiness. What we're going to do is deconstruct the profound concepts from this specific chapter and actually turn them into a daily, highly practical toolkit for your life. So we're not just floating around in abstract philosophy here. No, we are pulling out real, actionable strategies for how you interact with people, how you lead, and how you make those really tough decisions. Let me just ask you right off the bat, are you waiting for the weather to clear, or are you carving out your own path? The text brings up this great proverb about waiting for good weather on a sea voyage. It's basically that mindset of just sitting tight and hoping things naturally get better. We all fall into that trap, right? Passively waiting for the good stuff to just happen to us. But today, we are completely challenging that mindset. Let's get right into Section 1, What is Courage? Beyond a Brave Feeling. The source uses this absolutely incredible metaphor here. It illustrates courage not just as an emotion, but as a literal golden axe used for deliberate, proactive action. Just picture that for a second. An axe isn't something that just happens to you. It's a tool you physically have to pick up. It takes a solid grip, a strong swing, and pure intention. Courage is the tool you use to literally hack your way through the dense jungle of life's challenges. And this really nails the core shift we need to make. On one side, you've got waiting for fate. That's the passive stance. Waiting for the storm to pass, crossing your fingers that good fortune just magically drops into your lap. On the flip side, we have proactive action. The text argues we have to shift away from just hoping our circumstances improve. We need to actively pick up that golden axe to shape our own destiny.
You're not a victim of your environment, you're the architect of it. Well, provided you have the courage to actually swing the axe.
Moving on to Section 2, Compassion and Courage, the Strength to Guide.
Think about this for a second. When you're being kind to someone, are you acting out of genuine love, or are you maybe just trying to be a people pleaser? It's kind of a tough question to ask yourself. The text points out that people who view themselves as gentle or kind sometimes just end up nodding along with whatever anyone else says. They essentially become shapeshifters, totally losing their own identity just to avoid ruffling any feathers.
Look at the stark contrast here between conventional softness and actual, true compassion. Just pandering to someone's feelings, that's often just a fear of conflict masquerading as kindness. True love actually requires the courage to guide others strictly for their own ultimate good. I mean, if someone is heading straight off a cliff, a truly compassionate person doesn't just smile and validate their journey, right? They have the courage to pull them back, even if it causes some serious temporary friction.
All right, Section 3, on leadership, the power of character.
First things first, we have to establish what leadership is not. We have to completely toss out those conventional markers of authority. The text is super explicit about this. External factors do not make you a leader. You could have the fanciest job title in the building, the most stacked resume, or the sharpest suit, but absolutely none of that grants you genuine leadership power. Sure, people might obey you because they have to, but they aren't truly following you.
So, what is it then? Well, the source defines true leadership as an inspiring power, a high spirituality, and a magnetic charm that just exudes from a person's deeply cultivated character. It almost describes it like a scent, an invisible aura of character that people just intuitively pick up on. And how exactly do you build that character? It comes through the courageous everyday refinement of your own spirit and actions. It's a total inside-out process, definitely not some outside-in label.
Let's look at Section 4, on decision-making, strength in flexibility.
The text lays out this incredibly dynamic four-step framework. First up, you have to act quickly, because let's face it, paralysis by overanalysis is the absolute enemy of success. Second, you carefully observe the changing situation. Third, and honestly, this is the toughest part, you must have the courage to admit your faults. And finally, you flexibly correct your course. This just goes to show that practical decision-making isn't about stubbornness. It's definitely not about picking a path and blindly sticking to it no matter what. It's all about having the courageous flexibility to constantly course-correct based on what's actually happening in reality.
And here is the absolutely crucial point. Why is admitting a mistake so insanely difficult for us? It's our ego. Admitting you messed up requires immense courage because you have to completely let go of your own petty pride to get to a better outcome. A weak leader will cling to a terrible decision simply because they're terrified of looking foolish. But a truly courageous leader? They will happily abandon a bad decision because their commitment to the greater good entirely outweighs their need to look perfect. Finally, Section 5, the origin of courage, the ultimate purpose.
According to the source material, we need courage for two massive reasons. Number one, to prevent the proliferation of evil. The text points out that negativity and wrongdoing usually creep in right through the cracks of human weakness, hesitation, and cowardice. If we lack the courage to stand up, we're basically giving negativity a free pass to spread. And number two, courage is required to actively build a utopia, an ideal world. You literally cannot build something great if you're paralyzed by the fear of criticism or failure.
The text leaves us with this incredibly visceral metaphor. Earlier we talked about the golden axe for your own individual life, right? Well, on a macro level, courage becomes the carpenter's tools, the saws, the planes, the chisels you need to build an ideal society. Without these active, physical tools of courage, we just cannot construct a better world. You could hold the most beautiful blueprint for a perfect society in your mind, but without the courageous tools to actually cut the wood and drive the nails, it just remains a total fantasy.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought as we wrap up today's explainer. Do you have your tools ready? Are you just going to passively sit there waiting for the weather to clear? Or are you ready to pick up your golden axe, grab those carpenter's tools, and courageously carve out your ideal reality? The blueprint is right there in front of you, but the actual building? Well, that's entirely up to you.
Ever feel like you're just kind of stuck on autopilot? Like you're trapped in this endless loop of ordinary, unchallenging days? Well, if that sounds familiar, we're going to break that cycle today. In this explainer, we are unpacking a really powerful 5-step ascension framework, and this is completely designed to transform a stagnant existence into a deeply dynamic, proactive life. So, pulling from Chapter 7 of our source material, which is titled The Origin Point of Happiness, we are going to explore what the author calls an ascension journey. You can basically think of this as a profound philosophical climb. It takes you from finding your absolute starting line in life, all the way to achieving this state of limitless flight. It's a place where massive growth happens, and where external forces actually step in to help you out. All right, here is our roadmap for the explainer today. We'll be looking at 5 steps: the frontier spirit, an ever-victorious mindset, maintaining a positive attitude, the snowball view of life, and limitless soaring ahead. Let's jump right in. Step 1. The frontier spirit. Establishing your frontline base. To really get why this frontier spirit is so absolutely crucial, we gotta look at the alternative. Without a frontier, it is incredibly easy to just slip into a stagnant life. You lack problem awareness, and you just end up repeating these ordinary, comfortable days. But to live a proactive life, you've got to have a frontline base. You have to actively maintain a challenging spirit and constantly open up new, vast territories for your personal growth. Because the reality is, you literally cannot conquer new territory if you haven't even established where your frontier is. So, I want you to look inward for a second. Ask yourself right now, what exactly is the wild frontier that you are trying to conquer? What specific obstacles are standing in your way today? If you can't name your frontier, you can't push past it. Identifying that is step number 1 to living proactively. Step 2, an ever-victorious mindset. Learning from the drama. Now, equipping this mindset definitely doesn't mean you never lose on paper. What it actually means is deeply accepting every single difficulty, setback, and criticism as a completely necessary lesson for your soul. True victory is not about avoiding failure, it's about aggressively reframing it. The source text brings up Thomas Edison here, and it brilliantly illustrates the point. Failing thousands of times isn't a final defeat, right? It's just a vital discovery of what doesn't work. By confirming what fails, you're constantly winning the game of elimination, which inevitably pushes you right to the correct answer. Step 3, maintaining a positive attitude. Discarding the trap of self-pity. Okay, to build on that winning mindset, we absolutely have to ditch self-pity. And the author points out some really subtle, honestly kind of funny ways we sabotage ourselves just to get a little sympathy. Like, be honest, have you ever secretly rejoiced at getting a 39-degree fever right before a massive exam or a big deadline? We literally do this because it gives us a socially acceptable excuse to fail. Subconsciously, we play the tragic hero. We decide we'd rather get comfort and sympathy than actually face the challenge and risk our ego. So how do we cure this toxic cycle? We have to stop demanding sympathy from the people around us. Instead, this needs to become an active, daily practice of affirming your own positivity. You literally have to tell yourself, I am always fortunate, I'm always proactive, I'm always a pioneer. You have to replace that exhausting desire for comfort with an absolute, unstoppable desire for forward momentum. Step 4, the snowball-type view of life. Rolling up your troubles. This right here is hands down my favorite metaphor in the whole explainer. The snowball-type view of life is this philosophy where you just refuse to stop growing simply because circumstances aren't perfect. Imagine you're rolling this giant snowball. Naturally, dirt, pebbles, rocks, which represent your daily criticisms and hardships, they're gonna get stuck in it. A stagnant person just stops rolling the second their snow isn't perfectly white anymore. But a proactive person, they roll that dirt right into the center of their snowball. Let's break down how this actually works. First, you experience some hardship. Boom, dirt enters your snow. Second, you completely refuse to stop rolling forward. Third, by keeping that momentum, you gather fresh, new snow right over that dirt, which basically represents extracting the life lesson. And finally, just watch what happens to the size of your snowball. That dirt actually adds mass. By rolling up your troubles instead of avoiding them, your hardships literally make you a larger, more capable human being. You expand your capacity 2 or even 3 times over. Step 5, limitless soaring ahead, gaining cosmic cooperation. So once you've nailed those first 4 steps, finding your frontier, getting that victorious mindset, dropping the self-pity, and rolling up your hardships into a giant snowball, you unlock this profound secret about how the world actually works. When you silently and proactively forge your own path, you naturally draw attention. That self-reliant energy just inevitably invites cooperation. Your boss naturally wants to promote you, your peers step in to help, and the source text even suggests that unseen forces like guardian spirits are naturally drawn to assist people who are proactively helping themselves. And that reveals this really beautiful paradox. You shouldn't rely on others initially, and you definitely shouldn't be sitting around waiting for a savior. Your own self-reliant, proactive snowballing is the exact magnet that makes others want to elevate you. It's your independent effort that unlocks limitless, boundless soaring in life. So, as we wrap up this analysis, I really want to leave you with this thought. Take a look at your life today. What specific criticisms, setbacks, or, rocks and dirt are bothering you right now? And more importantly, how are you going to choose to roll them into your snowball today to fuel your own unstoppable growth? The frontier's yours. Keep rolling. Welcome to The Explainer. We've got a seriously mind-expanding journey ahead of us today. We're going to zoom all the way out, literally to the very edge of the galaxy, and then we're going to zoom right back in, deep down into the human soul. Think about this for just a second. When you look up at the night sky, how many of those brilliant twinkling stars are actually already dead? It's wild, but the text we're looking at today points out this fascinating astronomical reality. The starlight we see shining so brightly right now, that light has often traveled for hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years just to reach our eyes. So we're quite literally looking at ghosts. The physical stars that cast that light might have died off millennia ago, but their light is only just now showing up here on Earth. And that profound little observation completely sets the stage for our source material today. We're diving into Chapter 8 of a book called The Origin of Happiness. In this explainer, we're going to impartially unpack the book's really fascinating worldview on humanity's place in the universe. We'll see how understanding our cosmic scale can actually completely reshape the way we define personal success and, our own spiritual value. Okay, let's dive into this. The source asks us to compare the macro with the micro. So on the macro side, you have the great universe, right? Filled with billions of swirling galaxies and stars. But then on the micro side, you have the human body. The text suggests that our physical bodies actually contain vast universes of their own. I mean, think about it from the perspective of the microbes and cells living inside us. To them, our internal organs function just like massive planetary systems or entire galaxies. And that leaves humanity stuck squarely in the middle. From the perspective of the grand cosmos, our entire Earth might just be a single cell, and we're merely the microscopic bacteria living on it. The text argues that humanity is caught right between the extremely large and the extremely small, and because of that, we are entirely unable to objectively measure our true, absolute size in the universe. We are essentially unmeasurable. Which brings us to a pretty radical perspective on our earthly reality. The source calls this the truth of the three-dimensional world. The author uses this highly vivid analogy, so picture this. Imagine a higher dimensional spiritual reality. From that four-dimensional perspective, our entire three-dimensional universe is basically just a fish tank sitting on a table in a room. Our world isn't the entirety of existence. It's just a contained, temporary training ground for the soul. Meaning, all those little things we stress about on a daily basis, they're completely confined to that little glass box. To take that analogy even further, the text actually views our life here on Earth like a temporary movie playing on a screen. On-screen, characters might face tragedy, they fail, or they might even die in some dramatic action sequence. But in reality, outside the movie, no actors were actually harmed. The text suggests that our earthly failures are exactly like those movie scenes. Our true spiritual essence remains completely unharmed, no matter what happens in this 3D world. Section 1. Abandon pretense. Stripping away the worldly illusion. Now, what's really interesting about this concept is that if our physical world is just a temporary movie screen, then a lot of what we obsess over daily is simply an illusion. The source draws a really sharp line here to help us strip away that pretense. It divides things into two very distinct types of value. On one side, we have utility or worldly value. This is your status, wealth, titles, academic degrees. But these are only valid here on Earth, inside that fish tank. On the other side, we have divine or spiritual value. This represents inner truth, the pure condition of the mind. And the text asserts this is the absolute only value that actually carries over into the next world. The warning here is actually quite stark. The text points out that someone could be a highly respected company president or a super wealthy government minister. But if they're chasing only worldly utility and they lack that true divine value, they're actually living a profoundly empty life. That worldly identity, that outward show, that is the exact pretense the text challenges us to abandon.
So how do we actually do that? Well, the text outlines a pretty intimate but absolutely necessary process. Step 1 requires deep reflection, really examining your daily life and your actions. Step 2 asks you to mentally strip away all your titles, your wealth, your career history, and your societal standing. Just peel it all back. And then step 3, which honestly might be the hardest part, you have to look at what's left. You have to discover what truly remains of your character when all those worldly costumes are completely removed.
Section 2, Standing Empty. The power of starting from absolute zero. That deep reflection we just talked about leads to a really profoundly challenging concept in the text, standing completely empty-handed, having zero earthly attachments. It means reaching a state of mind where you're starting from absolute zero, relying on nothing but your bare soul. To illustrate this, the author actually shares a very personal anecdote. He describes leaving behind this highly secure corporate career. At one point, he says he could borrow over 1 billion yen with a single phone call, just because of his company's societal trust. But when he left to start his spiritual organization, he started with absolutely nothing. No capital, no employees, zero societal credit. He had to rely entirely on his pure, empty core. And this brilliantly illustrates a major theme of the text, because when you accept standing entirely naked and empty-handed in the world, you suddenly eliminate fear. Think about it. If you have literally nothing left to lose, and your foundation is built purely on your inner spiritual truth, you gain this unshakable courage. You are ready to face any difficulty that comes your way. Section 3. The will of the universe, aligning the micro with the macro. So let's begin our grand zoom out. How does this purified, empty human core actually connect back to the vastness of the cosmos we talked about at the very beginning? Well, the text states beautifully that even if we are like small bacteria on the cosmic scale, the will of the great universe flows directly within us. So the crucial point is, this grand cosmic intention isn't just out there, floating around in distant, dead galaxies. It exists right inside our microscopic human existence. Meaning, your physical scale truly does not matter. What matters is the authenticity of that stripped-down inner core we just uncovered. If your inner core is genuine, if it's completely untainted by worldly pretense, the text argues it actually becomes the true vehicle for universal energy. It literally opens the path to ultimate success. Because when your core is pure, it naturally aligns with what the universe inherently desires anyway. And, according to the source, the will of the universe constantly desires generation, development, and prosperity. It always wants to grow. By abandoning vanity and standing empty, the individual perfectly harmonizes with the cosmos's endless drive for continuous growth and evolution. It's like you're tapping right into the ultimate power source. We've traveled all the way from the outer limits of dead stars right down to the innermost truth of the human soul today. So I want to leave you with a question to reflect on long after this explainer ends. When all worldly pretense is finally stripped away from your life, what core remains within you? And does it align with the expansive will of the universe? Thanks for exploring this with me. Keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are exploring a truly fascinating piece of source material, a lecture titled The Origin of Happiness. Now, if you think this is just going to be another one of those abstract, feel-good philosophical theories, well, think again. We're actually going to map out a journey that takes deep, ambitious spiritual philosophy and crash tests it right against the unforgiving, gritty reality of the real world. I am genuinely so excited to unpack this with you today because it fundamentally challenges how we view our daily struggles, so let's jump right in.
We're just going to hit the ground running with the core question of this entire explainer. Does true happiness come from getting what we want or giving what we have? I know, it sounds like a simple, maybe even slightly cliché question at first glance. But the author actually uses this as the anchor for a really deep psychological and spiritual framework. Think about it. Most of us naturally default to listing the things we lack, right?
wealth, status, an easier job. And we convince ourselves that just getting those things is the magic key to happiness. But as we're going to see, the source material argues that this exact mindset is quite literally the root of human suffering.
All right, moving into section 1, starting from 0.
To really understand where unhappiness comes from, we actually need to rewind all the way back to the very beginning of human life. The author introduces this foundational concept that physically and socially, every single one of us begins at the exact same starting line. Think about newborns. At birth, there is absolute equality. Every baby weighs roughly 3,000 grams. They have zero wealth, zero status, and as the author humorously points out, no one is even born wearing their own diaper. But fast forward to adulthood, and man, intense individual differences emerge. Looks, wealth, status, intelligence. The author points out that we use these stark adult differences to constantly compare ourselves to others. And that comparison, it becomes a massive engine for our own anxiety and suffering.
Now, what's really interesting here is how the author totally reframes that suffering. You might be wondering, why do these painful societal differences exist at all? Well, the argument is that this friction actually matters. It's absolutely crucial. Without these differences and the powerful resistance they create, we wouldn't ever develop true individuality. I mean, if everything were perfectly easy and everyone were exactly the same, arrogance and complacency would just completely take over. So the takeaway here is that this struggle, this sheer pain of comparison and competition, is actually a necessary mechanism designed to literally polish our character and our soul.
Let's look at section 2, the pioneer's burden.
So, once we accept that friction is necessary, what happens to the people who try to push through it and forge a completely new path? We get a great historical example here from the critics of Christopher Columbus. After Columbus returned from his incredibly arduous journey, people at a celebratory banquet completely dismissed his achievements. They literally said anyone could do that once they know how. It perfectly captures how quick society is to criticize and minimize a pioneer's intense struggle the second the dust settles and the path becomes obvious.
And this leads us straight to the famous anecdote of Columbus's egg. When his critics minimized his voyage, Columbus reportedly challenged them to stand an egg on its end. Naturally, none of them could do it. So what does he do? He simply taps the egg on the table, slightly breaking the bottom, and boom, it stands upright. Of course, the critics cried foul, saying that was too easy, but the lesson here is profound. Executing a brilliant idea for the very first time requires immense courage, and you're going to face massive resistance. Doing something entirely unprecedented is incredibly isolating, no matter how ridiculously easy it looks in hindsight.
Let's ground this concept even further with another striking example from the text. The author points to Abraham Lincoln. Now, today, we think of Lincoln as this universally revered, unshakable leader. But during the Civil War, with the nation literally tearing itself apart, he faced extreme loneliness and agonizing self-doubt. The source recounts this incredibly raw story of a guest at the White House hearing a low groaning noise in the middle of the night. When they peeked through a door, the guest saw the President of the United States crawling on the floor, weeping, digging his nails into the carpet, and praying for guidance. It just goes to show that true leadership and breaking new ground involves terrifying, absolute isolation.
Which brings us to section 3, balance sheet of life.
Having established the sheer burden of forging a path, the author introduces a really powerful concept, applying a financial accounting framework to our moral and personal lives. Think about this. If you were to draw up a balance sheet for the first 2 decades of your life, the results are pretty startling. Under the what I received column, it is just overflowing. Milk, food, diaper changes, education, comforting, endless care. But then you look over at the what I gave column, and for the first 20 years of life, it's practically empty. You gave almost nothing back. We are all profoundly indebted to the world around us. And seeing this stark imbalance led the author to a massive aha moment during his 20s. He had this deeply uncomfortable realization, concluding, I am a taker. I have given almost nothing back, yet I constantly complain. He realized that his own unhappiness and internal friction stemmed directly from this dynamic. He was constantly out there demanding more from the world, more respect, more success, instead of asking how he could finally start adding some value to that what I gave column.
Section 4, Trials in New York.
Now, having a theoretical realization is great, but life has a funny way of testing our philosophies, doesn't it? The author headed to Wall Street as a young finance worker to truly test his beliefs in the fire of the corporate world. And his daily routine was just brutal. Waking up at 6:30 a.m., starting work at 8 a.m., processing telexes, working an exhausting 12-hour shift until 8 p.m., but his day wasn't even close to over. He'd then rush to night classes for finance at NYU and wouldn't even get back to his apartment until 2:30 in the morning. And to make matters worse, when he'd take a quick shower at 2:30 a.m., his upstairs neighbor, who was a stressed Columbia grad student, would angrily knock on the floor with a broomstick because of the noise, so he was basically operating on about 4 hours of sleep.
The crucial point to remember here is that this wasn't just mental exhaustion, it was sheer physical terror. 40 kilograms, or about 88 pounds. That was the weight of the massive Duralumin briefcase full of actual cash that he, as the youngest guy in the office, was forced to haul all around New York City, entirely alone.
The reality on Wall Street was incredibly gritty for him. While hauling that heavy cash alone to the World Trade Center, he was constantly terrified of just being hit over the head with a bat and robbed. Meanwhile, his older colleagues would literally spend their afternoons drinking, only to yell at him for being slow when he returned to do their paperwork. On top of all this, he was struggling through high-level finance classes taught entirely in rapid-fire English, sitting right alongside native Wall Street professionals. It was just absolute, overwhelming friction from every possible direction.
What's truly fascinating to me here is the intense internal conflict going on. On one hand, the author felt he had this grand spiritual calling, experiencing visions, feeling destined for a massive global mission. But on the other hand, his gritty reality was carrying heavy cash, suffering intense sleep deprivation, and enduring mundane corporate scolding. He genuinely struggled with this, wondering, if I'm supposed to have this grand mission, why am I hauling a briefcase of cash in fear for my life? Are my ideals just a complete illusion?
Let's wrap it up with Section 5, Forged in the Fire.
So, how do all these narrative arcs actually come together? Well, surviving those agonizing, exhausting days at the World Trade Center wasn't a distraction from his philosophy, it was the ultimate validation of it. The whole process is summarized perfectly right here. Step 1, endure real-world friction. You literally cannot escape the pain of differences and the grind of reality. Step 2, stop expecting to merely receive. You have to take a hard look at your position on the balance sheet of life. And Step 3, transform into a resilient giver. Surviving those worldly trials is the exact mechanical process required to transition from being a selfish taker into someone actually capable of giving massive value back to the world.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly powerful question to chew on. Are the daily struggles, the annoyances, the seemingly unfair friction you're facing right now actually the exact necessary tools needed to forge your true path? Because if we view our hardships not as punishments, but as the literal friction required to polish us from a taker into a giver, well, it kind of changes everything, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope it sparks some curiosity for you, and I'll catch you on the next one.